بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Alhamdulillah, in our classes on Surah al-Kahf explained, we have looked extensively at the opening of the story of Sayyidina Musa with al-Khadir, and now we see al-Khadir's response and the strange incidents that take place, which Sayyidina Musa feels compelled and responsible to object to. So that's what we are focusing on today. The playing out of the story of Sayyidina Musa. So now Sayyidina Musa has made his commitment to follow al-Khadir. Khadir has told him that you will not be able to be patient with me, but Sayyidina Musa reiterates his pledge and they head out. So let's see what happens there. We saw the statement of Sayyidina Musa, may I follow you, provided that you teach me some of the right guidance that you have been taught. Sayyidina al-Khadir alayhi salam said, قال إنك لن تستطيع معي صبرا. Right? You will certainly not be patient enough with me. And this raises a question. Why did Sayyidina al-Khadir state this categorically? Right? And numerous things are understood from that. They say, well, this is from the inner wisdom of al-Khadir, etc. But one of the simple realities is that if you take things back to first principles, the Mashaykh tell us, who is Sayyidina Musa? He is a prophet and a messenger. Right? He has a sacred law. Right? Sayyidina Musa has been commanded by Allah to seek out this servant of his servants, namely the one we know to be al-Khadir. Right? He has not been told to unconditionally follow him. He has been told, bearing the sacred law and guidance that he bears, to seek him out. Sayyidina al-Khadir has revelation from God that he follows. Right? And this is why the majority of the ulama held that al-Khadir was or is a prophet of God. Right? He has his sacred law, right? Through revelation from God. Now we have to be unequivocal. The door of revelation is closed till the end of time with the coming of Khatam al-Nabiyyin, the seal of prophets. Right? We have to be unequivocal. No one else can say, well, I got instructions from the divine. That door has been shut with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So, in this, Sayyidina al-Khadir knows you certainly cannot be patient enough with me. And he explains why. Right? وَكَيْفَ تَصْبِرُ عَلَى مَا لَمْ تُحِطْ بِهِ خُبْرًا. And how can you be patient with what is beyond your realm of knowledge? Why is it beyond his realm of knowledge? Because the knowledge that we're talking about here is revelation. Right? It is revelation. And even though of the two, Sayyidina Musa is not only a prophet, but he is also a messenger, al-Khadir knows that this knowledge that he has been given through revelation is not from the sacred law of Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam. So there's a number of points in this response of al-Khadir. Right? That the basis of al-Khadir's negation is the fact that he knows who is Sayyidina Musa, and he knows who he is himself. And in this is very important from another perspective, which is that as seekers of knowledge, whether we are formal seekers of knowledge or as thinking Muslims, matters are known by their realities. Right? Matters are known by their realities. Right? And this is a fundamental aspect of the classical understanding of reason, right? Of reasoning, of having a living intellect, aql, right? That's Shaykh Adib Kallas used to put it in a very simple truism: تعرف الأمور بتعريفها. Matters are known by their definitions, and definitions capture the reality of something, right? Who, what, why, and then how, right? And then when. So who is this person? Right? Who is this person? What do they represent? Why? And then, so here, if you know who someone is, then you know how they're likely to respond. So this is the base of his negation. Now, there's another aspect to it at a human level, but we affirm unequivocally, of course, this is an insight we take, but we don't ascribe this to Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam, right? Which is that a person naturally opposes that which they don't understand, right? This is something that Khadir shares a general principle in life, that if someone doesn't understand something, they would oppose it. However, it is the case here is not that Sayyidina Musa was, incapable of knowing it, etc. But the nature of this knowledge was through revelation, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had chosen that the encompassing revelation granted Sayyidina Musa would not encompass these particulars that Al-Khadir was granted. So, and that just reminds us of the nature of divine will, right? And power, which is from what is entailed by lordship, right? That لِلَّهِ فِعْلُ كُلِّ مُمْكِنٍ وَتَرْكُهُ. Allah can do what He wills or leave it. So Allah, just as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, يَخْتَصُّ بِرَحْمَتِهِ مَنْ يَشَاءُ. He specifies with His mercy whomsoever He wills. And one of the many explanations of what that mercy is revelation. Right? That He chooses for His revelation whomsoever wills, and with what extent that they are granted. Okay. This, of course, connects with a third point, which is that who was Al-Khadir? Right? And this and many other things, and that's not a simple question, but this would reinforce this clearest, simplest explanation is that Al-Khadir was a prophet. It was a prophet. Otherwise, he would not have acted in this way. And Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam would not have remained patient with him. He would not have remained patient with him, as we will see today, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. There's another point as well, that when Sayyidina Al-Khadir said, إِنَّكَ لَن تَسْتَطِيعَ مَعِيَ صَبْرًا, you will not be able to be patient with me. There's an interesting point that is mentioned, that there are two types of people who seek knowledge. And this is mentioned by Sheikh Sulaiman al-Jamal in his Hashia on the Jalalain. And he's quoting prior authorities that a seeker of knowledge is of two types. One type of seeker of knowledge is someone who doesn't know anything. Someone who doesn't know anything. And they haven't become accustomed to the ways of reasoning and thinking, right? And the way of scholarly discourse, right? Of consideration and reflection and objection, etc. Right? The way of scholarly discourse. As something is presented, this is now an advanced seeker. They have a background in knowledge. They can understand what is said, the indications, the implications, the potential objections. Like they can visualize the knowledge and its implications, and they actively engage with it. And the second type of, so one is the beginner student who doesn't have these things. The other is someone who has a lot of knowledge and who has an extensive body of the tools of knowledge, right? So they know the ways of reasoning and objection, etc. So if the second category of seeker of knowledge, right, who is already accomplished, if they choose to direct themselves to a person who has knowledge that they don't have, then this type of seeking knowledge is a lot more difficult. Why? Because they come with priors, right? They come with baggage that may be facilitative, but also may be an impediment. Right? It is much easier to teach young children if you can herd them into classrooms and set the boundaries of discipline. They'll just follow along. But this is also analogous in many ways to a lot of adult learning in our times. That a lot of people like the idea of having adab with one's teacher, of learning in classical ways, etc. However, the ulama of old have said it's very different when someone has a background. Now, some people may not be coming with strong Islamic background to learn, but they have their high school studies, their university studies, their professional experience. All of that can serve the seeking of knowledge, but can also be an impediment. إِنَّكَ لَن تَسْتَطِيعَ مَعِيَ صَبْرًا. You will not be able to be patient with me. One, because of the intellectual tools they already have and the baggage that comes with it. The sense of self that arises from that, but also their life experiences, right? So if the teacher says something, they contrast it with their own life experiences. And they may not always be able to differ. Right? And that makes that relationship more challenging. And we see in that practical lessons in our times for being a seeker of knowledge as an adult. Right? In Sayyidina Musa's response. And one of the merits that we can just mention in some before looking at the various incidents is that you should always ask, even if you know the question will result in objection, right? Because the asking is sincere for Allah and the objection is sincere for Allah, because one should study with teachers who are sincere. So if, for example, a teacher is explaining something, to give an example from fiqh, the jurists, the fuqaha, explain the laws of menstruation in a particular manner. And they define blood to be of two types. Now, someone with a medical background will say, okay, I want to learn the rules, but they'll say, no, scientifically, this is not how we describe blood. So what do? Do you just remain silent and say, okay, whatever? And that will result in internal objections. Rather, the right thing to do is to ask, even if the question may result in an objection, because that's what being principled entails, is to ask, could you please explain this? Why? And often you can understand. If you wait for the answer, you can understand that the considerations of the scholars of fiqh, for example, and the prophetic teachings is not science. its practical and practicable rulings. Women can't run scientific experiments on themselves to determine, clinically what type of bleeding or discharge this actually is. You need outward signs. So the teachings related to those rulings are based on outward signs and indicators that anyone can discern without having to regularly seek the recourse of medical or other experts. Okay, that's understandable. Right? So this is one of the aspects of asking questions. Right? And then we continue to the actual incidents themselves. Right? So what happens? Right? What happens here? Right? As we continue in Surah Kahf, the story of Sayyidina Musa and al-Khadir continues with firstly a reassurance from Sayyidina Musa. قال ستجدني إن شاء الله صابرا ولا أعصي لك أمرا. Right? Musa assured him, you will find me patient, Allah willing, and I will not disobey any of your orders. Right? And قال, what did he respond with? Say it.
قال فإن اتبعتني فلا تسألني عن شيء حتى أحدث لك منه ذكرا.
So Sayyidina al-Khadir lays out his condition. Then, if you follow me, then do not question me about anything until I myself have clarified it for you. This is the condition that he places, right? Because a relationship of learning is a willful relationship between two parties, right? The seeker of knowledge and the teacher, right? And it's very important here, you see, here is a prophet, a messenger of God, one of the greatest of all creation. After the Prophet ﷺ, who is the best of prophets? Right? They're the ulul azm. And Sayyidina Musa is one of them. Right? So he's one of the very best of all creation. But when he makes a request, he makes a clear request. Sayyidina al-Khadir is very clear about both about his concern, that you won't be able to be patient. Sayyidina Musa clarifies, reiterates his commitment, and al-Khadir doesn't just say, okay, sure, let's go, but rather he leaves it to the willful choice of Sayyidina Musa. If you follow me, then do not question me about anything, right? It's also preparing him for events very strange. But this is a very important thing, right? That a lot of times people get themselves into situations that they haven't thought through. But also, the teachers haven't really thought through who the students are that they're dealing with and whether they'll be able to follow through, right? So someone goes to a Quran teacher and says, I want to finish the qira'at in 2 years. And the person is an IT professional and so on, right? So the teacher says, okay, I'll do it. Can someone who are hafiz do qira'at in 2 years? Possibly, yeah, right? But someone comes and they have beautiful adab and this and that, they memorize the Quran in 18 months, etc. But they just take them on. And however, could someone who's doing 60 to 70 hours a week at work do the 10 recitations of the Quran in 2 years? Not properly, right? Or it's highly unlikely that they'll be able to. So what happens? They did not set their agreement, the context, the considerations, the concerns, the commitment, what it would require in advance. right? So that, are you clear about what you are committing to? Are you clear of what it entails? Are you clear of what I need as a teacher to be able to fulfill what you say you are seeking? Right? So what happens? Let's say the Quran teacher keeps following up. Okay, have you done this week's work? Have you done this week's work? And the person said, why are you annoying me? Now, at one level, why is the Quran teacher following up with their student of the 10 recitations? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? Because he's trying to serve according to what the person stated they wanted. However, that seeker has realities that they cannot escape. They have to provide for their family. They're busy. They have other concerns. So this is something very important in life with respect to seeking knowledge. It also applies to seeking the spiritual path. Very often, scholars of the spiritual path set conditions. The conditions may not be understandable. Why are you being so conservative? Why are you setting such a rigid code of conduct? Why are you this? Why do you expect us to come twice a week for lessons? Why this? Why this? So the problem is the seeker hadn't thought through what they were committing to. But also it could be that the teacher is not fully considering the context of their students and laying out the conditions that they need to be able to serve thoroughly. So that's something that we should consider, but it also applies to other things in life. To enter into any relationship with another with clarity. Right? Even, the same things apply to life. Someone marries an activist. So they're a professional, but they're an activist. Zubair serves at the local food bank, and they're passionate about it. So Zubaydah liked the idea of marrying an activist, but had she thought about what are the implications of that in their life? No, and it'll cause trouble, right? So this relates to many things in life, right? And sometimes also the practical reality that one should explain the context. I've dealt with many cases, parents were very excited. We want beta to become a hafiz. Okay, they become a hafiz and they send them to, like I know certainly in the Syrian tradition, when they give the ijazah, it has in it, and I will teach the Quran and not withhold its knowledge from anyone who comes seeking it for the sake of Allah. So Quran teachers, anybody who goes to them, they would not say no to them, even if it be at awkward hours, etc. Now the parents are, what is going on? Our house is like a circus. Zubaydah has ladies coming morning and evening, right? She leaves the house to teach Quran. What is going on? Well, you're the one who made her a hafiz, right? And that has implications. So these are there are numerous other lessons, but these are just a few of them. Okay. And these, and if you reflect, you would find other things as well, right? Musa's commitment, of course, was conjoined with the statement, Insha'Allah, right? Insha'Allah, right? But Al-Khadir did not say that. And one of the reasons for that is that a teacher needs to be more decisive than a student. The basis is that the student has a greater expression of adab than the teacher. The teacher needs to be firm in interest of the student. Right? And Sulaiman al-Jamal and others mention that. Right? The student, it's important for them to show their resolve, but also affirm their need. But the teacher has to be firm, right? With care. The adab of following is stated here, right? Also, that you'll find me patient. So he makes a commitment, And he reiterates, despite what he said before, وَلَا أَعْصِي لَكَ أَمْرًا, and I will not disobey you. And there's no real seeking of knowledge. It's only token unless the student is willing to listen to their teachers. Right? Of course, not about the choice of ice cream, not about should I buy bifocals or graduated lenses or just get reading glasses instead. Right? And students make mistakes by asking about tangential things, saying, how come the sheikh even tells me what ice cream to have? Who asked about it? You did. Right? If I ask you, what kind of burgers do you like the most? You don't really eat burgers. Let's just, the teacher says, have you tried such, Big's chicken tandoori burger? No. So check it out. Now the sheikh's not, that's not related to the teacher-student relationship. Right? Here, I will not disobey any of your orders, meaning related to this relationship of theirs. Right? And the Al-Khadir reiterates the final condition, which is very important to be clear about, right? He states, he's unequivocal in his statement. Then if you follow me, do not question me about anything until I've clarified it for you. He lays out his condition. And there's a sense, of course, clearly of deference. So then they head out. They head out. تفضل سيدي. فانطلقا
فانطلقا حتى إذا ركبا في السفينة خرقها قال أخرقتها لتغرق أهلها لقد جئت شيئا إمرا قال ألم أقل إنك لن تستطيع معي صبرا قال لا تؤاخذني بما نسيت ولا ترهقني من أمري عسرا.
So they set out, but after they had boarded a ship together, the man who's unnamed in the Quran, Al-Khadir, made a hole in it. Now here there's a subtle thing, right? And you should be noticing these things in the Quran. Did Sayyidina Musa travel to Al-Khadir alone? But the whole conversation that takes place is only between Musa and Al-Khadir alayhim as-salam. But then it's explicit. It's explicit when they board the ship. What does it say? فَانْطَلَقَا. What form is this in? It's muthanna, it's dual. So what happened to the youth who was accompanying Sayyidina Musa? Right? And you should notice these things. You should notice these things. And the Imams of Tafsir have. So Imam al-Qurtubi quotes Imam al-Qushayri in his Tafsir that it would appear that once they reached Al-Khadir, it would appear that when Sayyidina Musa reached Al-Khadir, he had the young man, the fata, who was serving him, he parted ways with him. Either told him to wait or told him to go back. Right? But it would not appear that the young man was with Sayyidina Musa. Right? And that's one understanding. Al-Qurtubi quotes his Shaykh, right? Abu al-Abbas Al-Qurtubi, that it could also be because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is putting the focal point on Musa and Al-Khadir. So the youth was there, but because he was so quiet, it's as if he wasn't there. Right? So they boarded the ship, and the man, Al-Khadir, made a hole in it. Right? So if you make a hole in a ship, it'll sink. Right? So Sayyidina Musa objected, he protested. Have you done this to drown its people? You have certainly done a terrible thing. Al-Khadir replied as he needed to reply. Did I not say that you cannot have patience with me? Right? And Sayyidina Musa pleaded, excuse me for forgetting, and do not be hard on me. And do not be hard on me. There's a couple of things here, right? That Sayyidina Musa has a sacred law that he is bound by. Right? He is bound by. We also have a sacred law we are bound by. If we see something wrong, we are bound by, we are people, the followers of prophets are people of truth and principle. The followers of prophets are people of truth and principles. What is the truth? It is revelation. What are the principles? They are the precepts, the ethical values, rules, principles, and the precepts that bind us, that are immutable. And there are details that lend themselves to difference. Do you raise your hands? These are not ethical points. Do you raise your hands at ear level, shoulder level, between shoulder level, below shoulder level? Right? This has no ethical bearing. It's a matter of following, and there's difference on it, as any educated Muslim would know. But their underlying principles of right and wrong, good and bad, that are non-negotiable, doesn't matter who it is. It doesn't matter who it is, right? But we do so with adab. We do so with adab, even when we object. So Sayyidina Musa protested, right? And of course, the protested is sort of tafsir, right? Is tafsir really. What does it say in Arabic? Qala, he said, right? He said. Dr. Mustafa Khattab, like other translators, put in that background to understand the rhetoric of the conversation. So he said to him, have you done this? But even asking it as a question, it's a firm question, right? But it's adab. It's firm question. He didn't say, you have done this, right? He said, have you done this, right? And really in the Arabic, right? If you look at the Arabic, قال أخرقتها, have you done this? Have you made a hole in it to drown its people? لقد جئت شيئا نكرا. Then, sorry, لقد جئت شيئا إمرا, right? It's an implicit response to a condition. If you did this to drown his people, then you have certainly done something that is terrible, right? So he is making a principled, unequivocal moral objection, but it's conditioned on his understanding. If you have done this for this, this is wrong indeed. Why? Because right and wrong are immutable. But has he judged him immediately for it? No. Because he's open to the possibility that it could be otherwise. Could be otherwise. Right? And that applies in the day-to-day. Like, of course, you must question. Like, I had a funny situation where I went to a community, and after Jumu'ah, the head of the masjid took funds from the Jumu'ah collection and put them in his pocket. But so I just looked at him, not accusingly. He said, "Say the Islamic Center's bank card's not working. I presently don't have funds of my own, so I got permission from the administration to take these funds to for lunch, because there's a meeting of a couple of scholars there. Okay, but you're duty bound. Can someone just take public funds for whatever? No, right? So one must ask, but one must do so with adab, right? And Sayyidina al-Khadir takes it back, right? And that's the mysterious component here, right? That did I not say that you cannot have patience with me? And Sayyidina Musa pleaded for excuse. Why is the case here? Sayyidina Musa was able to do this because he knows about who al-Khadir is. He is a prophet. He's doing this on the basis of revelation. He cannot understand it. He is duty bound to object to it by what he knows to be right and wrong. So there are numerous lessons in this seemingly simple incident. The explanation of why al-Khadir did this, we can see in when Sayyidina al-Khadir explains out, which we'll be looking at next lesson. But there's a few lessons that we can look at here. Right? We have mentioned before a few of the resources on tafsir of Surah Al-Kahf, and it gives extensive background, largely from the biblical tradition, regarding who these people were, right? And what was the ship, and what was going on historically, etc. Right? But that we will see when Al-Khadir himself explains it, right? And this is one of the background. Why is it important? Right? The background, right? Context is very important to understand anything. Right? Why? For example, I get hired to be the cook for Uncle Hamza. Right? So, very simple example, right? If Uncle Hamza, I ask him, would you like some salad with your breakfast? So I ask Uncle Hamza, whom I work with, would you like some salad for breakfast? He said, at this time, I don't eat salad. So there's another young cook who's my assistant, just hears half what happens. I get fired because I serve salad anyways. So Uncle Hamza has become a bit grumpy, he fires me. Okay, what happens? Young cook says, Uncle Hamza said, I don't eat salad. So he doesn't make salad for lunch or for dinner, ever. Is that sound understanding? No. He did say it, but there's a context, right? And that context could be prior words. It could be the social context of what takes place, right? And things aren't understood in some cases without the context in which they're being done. Without the context in which they're being done. I had the weirdest scenario of once I was sitting in my living room and there's a lady running down saying, Faraz, Shireen, help. And she took off her jilbab. She's screaming. Right now, someone's looking on the road. Why is this lady running to someone's house, taking off her clothes? Turns out that there's some bees or hornets that got under her jilbab. She has medical sensitivity to, what's it called? Bee stings, bee bites. What's it called? The sting of a bee. So she had to be actually taken to the clinic. Right? So of course, I went in called my wife to come. It was a very embarrassing situation. Now, if you see something from the outside, why is this lady behaving in a strange way? But there's a context. Now, the act itself, you don't want to say, excuse me, we are duty bound to have moral objection. That's what commanding the good and forbidding the wrong is. Right? Moral concern and moral objection out of concern. Right? And commanding the wrong is actually, forbidding the wrong is more important than commanding the good. Right? Because the concern of divine guidance and the preservation of good is fulfilled more by forbidding the wrong, by avoiding the wrong, than it is by doing the good. Right? The Prophet ﷺ said, مَا نَهِيتُكُمْ عَنْهُ فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ. All that I have forbidden you, leave completely. وَمَا أَمَرْتُكُمْ بِهِ. What I have commanded you to do, فَأْتُوا مِنْهُ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُمْ. Do of it as much as you can. And there's many other evidences for that. So that's why Sayyidina Musa is duty bound to object as a prophet. He sees something that is wrong, but you see deep adab in, right, principled but respectful. Likewise, Sayyidina al-Khadir alayhi salam, his response reiterates the commitment, right? He does not respond, and this is why it's a principled response, right? He laid down certain principles, right? And he takes his objection back to the principles, and that is being just, right? So this is a just objection. Some people read funny things into the story that, and that's got nothing to do with it. That Musa was angry and Al-Khadir was being mysterious. No. Al-Khadir is being deeply principled, right? Being deeply principled. He laid down certain principles and he held Sayyidina Musa to those principles, right? And here we see the reality of there sometimes are legitimate differences in life. There are legitimate differences in life, right? And this is exactly how difference of opinion arises in the details of religion, right? The details of religion. A Shafi'i would find it strange. How could a Hanafi allow such and such thing? And a Hanafi would find it strange how a Shafi'i could not allow such and such thing. Why? Because they're approaching truth with two different sets of principles. Now, in the case of Sayyidina Musa and Khadir, the two sets of principles are two sets of instructions from revelation. And revelation can differ with respect to actions, right? To actions, it cannot differ about beliefs, right? Because actions and the limits related to actions are subject to change in revelation. Could change through time, when based on custom. However, ultimate truths, which are the truths of belief and the ultimate underlying values of law, are immutable. Right? Like injustice being wrong, but how do we define injustice? Allah defines the reality of injustice. So, this is an example that sometimes we have. This is a case of legitimate difference. Sayyidina Musa must disagree. Sayyidina al-Khadir must hold him to their agreement. Right? And finally, Sayyidina Musa pleads, right? And apologizes, right? But a thing that should not be misunderstood from this is that we do not just defer to teachers based on blind trust. Right? We do not defer to teachers based on blind trust. Right? That, so a teacher does something, we ask and say, don't you trust me? Say, I do. We're not sheep. We're not sheep. Right? Here, the difference is Sayyidina al-Khadir, he's a prophet. Sayyidina Musa only accepted to defer to him, commanded by Allah, and because he knows he's acting on the basis of revelation. Otherwise, Sayyidina Musa could not have followed him unless Sayyidina al-Khadir had showed him the moral justification, the sound moral justification for these actions. That's very, very important to be clear about. Right? But it is clear from this, right, that al-Khadir here is a prophet. But we take a practical lesson from it as well, that sometimes we may make an error. Right? With respect to the commitment we have, what do? Our sense of dignity should not preclude us from apologizing. Right? And also to appeal to the person's care and concern. Right? There's a beautiful example of that. To appeal to someone's care and concern, Imam al-Shafi'i radiyallahu ta'ala anhu went to Muhammad ibn al-Hasan and asked him to borrow certain books. And Muhammad al-Hasan did not agree. So Imam al-Shafi'i wrote lines of poetry. إِنَّ الْعِلْمَ لَيَمْنَعُ أَهْلَهُ أَن يَمْنَعُوهُ أَهْلَهُ. Knowledge prevents its people from preventing it from its people. And with adab, he's saying that, look, I'm only seeking knowledge. You're a person of knowledge. But I too am a person of knowledge. So don't prevent it from me, right? With eloquence, beauty, tact, wisdom, respect. But resolve, right? With resolve. So he apologizes, but also says, go easy on me. And why? Because the nature of leading somebody does entail being firm. But as a student, you have to also know what you are able to handle. And sometimes you have to appeal. If the teacher is sincere and caring, they will give you opportunities. But we see you don't get too many, as we'll see in the story. That's also an important lesson in life. But you appeal to that, right? And this is from the intelligence of Sayyidina Musa. Because if a condition is broken, right, would Sayyidina al-Khadir have justification to say, okay, our relationship is over? Yes, contractually you do, right? Contractually in itself, right? In itself, right? Now, in certain places, they have a whole bunch of human considerations around the cold, hard law, right? But in itself, and that's why forget employees for a second. If you have a contractor, you hire someone to do something, they didn't do it, you have full justification to get out of the agreement. But he appeals that don't be hard on me, right? And then this is the first incident. The next incident, تفضلوا.
فانطلقا حتى إذا لقيا غلاما فقتله قال أقتلت نفسا زكية بغير نفس لقد جئت شيئا نكرا قال ألم أقل لك إنك لن تستطيع معي صبرا قال إن سألتك عن شيء بعدها فلا تصاحبني قد بلغت من لدني عذرا.
So they headed out. Now, if you're thinking, right, which is a good thing to do, right? They were on a boat from within which the man made a hole. And then they headed out. So where did they go? So if you even look in Tafsir al-Jalalain, they tell you in brief, but you should think about it. They're on the boat, then they headed out. The boat has a hole. Could they head out in the boat? No, right? So like it's mentioned even in Tafsir al-Jalalain, they came out from the boat, right? They came out from the boat and they walked. And they walked. Why did they walk? Because intalaqa normally has the sense of walking, right? But we don't know that for sure, but it seems the most evident, right? And what happened? They proceeded, right? And much is implicit. We don't know in the story where exactly was this boat to begin with, right? So they headed out, they went to the boat. There's this hyper focus on the purpose of the story. Everything else is put in the background, right? And one of the ulama said, the Quran teaches us how to focus in life. Just like the Prophet ﷺ, right? That what is your purpose? Be focused. احرص على ما ينفعك. Be avid for what will benefit you. What is the good, right? And as the Prophet ﷺ did, when one heads out from home, and even in home, the Prophet ﷺ, what did he used to do? He used to lower his gaze from anything not of concern to him. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, right? And that is an important value. And you see this in the stories. Where was it? Where were they walking? How are they walking? What did they talk about till they got to the next story? How was Musa feeling between incident A and incident B, which is important. The Quran tells us about many emotions, but that's not the point here. So none of that's mentioned. Now, the tafsir sometimes fill that out, but also because these are questions that are the fodder for reflection. Fodder for reflection. And that also, when you reflect, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us these rhetorical gaps, which are like vistas for reflection. And they bring out many meanings, especially if you appreciate the language of the Quran. Right? The language of the Quran. Why does the word intalaqa get used and another one, right? Instead of some other word, etc. But we can't touch upon that too much. So here they proceeded until they came across a boy, and the man killed him. How could killing a child possibly be allowed? Musa protested, "Have you killed an innocent soul who killed no one? You have certainly done a horrible thing." Shay'an nukra. Right? Nukra, from that you have the munkar, which is the outright wrong. He answered, did I not tell you that you cannot have patience with me? And this is not because you will emotionally not be able to deal with it, but rather, you are a messenger. You have a sacred law. You are bound by it. How can you have patience if what I'm doing on the basis of divine revelation entails the contrary of what you have? Moses replied, "If I ever question you about anything after this, then do not keep me in your company. For by then I would have given you enough of an excuse." Okay. And this, of course, makes very, very clear. Al-Khadir is acting on the basis of revelation. There's no other way to understand Sayyidina Musa deferring to him about a matter as grave as death. Especially what we know even Quranically in the stories of Sayyidina Musa being this amazing champion of truth, of justice. Right? And his own story with Fir'aun and it standing up for the Israelites and so many other things in his own life story, let alone just his being a prophet and messenger of God. So there's a couple of lessons that we wanted to touch upon here, bi'idhnillah, which are that, firstly, the context of this story, who was this child and what's the background, we will see it when we will listen to Sayyidina Khadir's own explanation, but a little bit of the background that is mentioned by the ulama at this point is that this child, the ghulam, Because a ghulam can refer to a boy who is before puberty or right around puberty. The ghulam can refer to a boy in general or a boy who's just on the eve of puberty. So like 10, 11 as well. But here, this child, right, this ghulam, was not yet an adult and was still playing with the children, right? And was exceedingly beautiful both in appearance and character. That's what the ulama of tafsir would mention, right? And he had done nothing wrong. One, he had not done anything objectionable in life, but also not being an adult, he had done nothing morally culpable, right? So he killed him, right? And the strange thing about killing him here, right, is that what does the fa indicate? Immediacy. They saw the child and Al-Khadir killed him. So it's also an amazing thing. It's not that they met him and there was an argument, he behaved badly. No. Like, that's a strange thing. They walk, hatta they suddenly saw a young boy. Right? Right? Suddenly. And immediately Al-Khadir killed him. Right? Right? Now, we don't know exactly how he killed him, but the biblical tradition has many different narrations of how he was killed. All of them are very strange. None of them are indicated, right? The ulama of tafsir mentioned these possibilities. That's not an explanation of revelation. That is giving a background. That background is speculative. It's speculative, right? Right? But it gives a background. It is not authoritative. But it's from the biblical tradition. There's no isnad in the biblical tradition. Right? So, but the important thing is he killed him immediately. So he asked this objection, right? The shocking nature of it made Sayyidina Musa object, number one, right? But he also objects with principle. Like, he doesn't ask him, how could you do this? What's wrong with you? Right? And this is very important. Believers are people of principle, right? We do not appeal in our thinking on emotion alone, right? We should be people of principle, and our principles should drive our emotions. A lot of times, people make really weird. Now we have to be cognizant of the reality that people are emotional, and we have to be very sensitive to them. However, the believer should not, for example, I have somebody say, I'm going to drop out from classes with Sheikh so-and-so. Why? Said, there's a whole bunch of times I've passed by him in the morning. He's not even greeted me. I think he doesn't like me. I said, do you realize he's running 7 different projects? Do you realize that before class he might be preparing for the class? I said, but didn't have books in front of him. I said, he could be reviewing from memory. I said, those who memorize Quran, do they have to have the Quran in front of them to revise? I said, no. Right? So that's an emotional response. The Shaykh doesn't like me. Why? He didn't look up and didn't smile at me. Sayyidina Musa, even at a shocking event, what does he appeal to? He appeals to reason, right? So he is naturally, have you killed an innocent soul, right? It's a very rational thing. If we see the text, have you killed an innocent soul? You see the thinking there, right? Because killing somebody could be, someone killing a criminal, or killing for self-defense, or killing an innocent person, someone who is. So have you killed an innocent soul who killed nobody, Right? Right? So they've not committed a crime themselves, nor they killed another person, that there be retribution. Then, and again, if this is what you did, then you have done a horrible thing. A truly horrible thing. And that's very, very important, right? That even, because if you consider within relationships, yes, your husband came in, he didn't smile. So I'm mad at him, he didn't smile. Right? The same thing can be framed in principle, right? And if we were more principled, right? And even when our emotions are wild, to strive to act on principle, that is from being aqil. And that's karamatul insan. That's being a rational human being. And that is the aslu karamatul insan. Right? Karamatul mar'i aqluhu wa dinuh. And the person's honor is their intellect and their religion. Everything else is decorative around that. Right? And it's tough. It's tough. But you see this in Sayyidina Musa's response. Even here, an innocent boy is killed in this crazy fashion. And he asks, have you done this? Right? But even then, because he knows who is doing it, so even then he has a strong objection, but in the same way as the previous one. It's like a rational statement. أَقَتَلْتَ نَفْسًا زَكِيَّةً. Right? Have you done this? It's like a conditional statement. إِن كُنْتَ قَدْ قَتَلْتَ نَفْسًا. If this is what you did, لَقَدْ جِئْتَ شَيْئًا نُكْرًا. Right? Then, so it's a logical, if this is what you've done, then this. Because there's a possibility that if there's a reason for it, I've not said anything. Right? Because the batal al-shart, batal al-mashrut. If the condition is not fulfilled, what's conditioned is not fulfilled. I didn't say anything bad to you. Right? So even in this utmost objection, and Sayyidina Musa, who's the senior of them in rank, there's no point of comparison between Sayyidina Musa's seniority and Al-Khadir. But he has respect of him in his forbidding the wrong. Right? So even, let's say, someone went, right? And I saw this strange incident, right? A person, not a scholar, but a very virtuous person at a hotel, he asked for a pina colada. And they poured rum and then the other thing. I'm staring, right? Now, what happened? He'd had pina colada from the supermarket, right? Now, especially in Canada, certainly. Now things are changing, sadly, about our alcohol laws. But just in the regular shelves, can you get alcohol? Generally not, although the regulations have been changing, sadly. Canada for a long time has been very conservative with alcohol sales, right? But it's been creeping, and we should be wary of that, right? We should be standing up for even these kinds of things. And no, it's good that alcohol is only sold completely separately. Before, you could only get it in liquor stores. Then they made a little thing. Now you can see it creeping in, but it's kept separate from other things. Right? And what's this obvious possibility? The context. There, he didn't know that you could have pina colada with alcohol in it. Or whatever the drink was. I forgot what it was. It's been 10 plus years, right? So you correct, but with that possibility, so you have to correct. You say, oh, he doesn't know, but you still have to correct it. Right? So this is one of the lessons. Right? But then Sayyidina Musa and Sayyidina Al-Khadir tells him the same thing. You won't be able to have patience with me. Why? Because of the same khilaf. This is against your sacred law. Right? Then Sayyidina Musa replies, if I ever question you about anything after this, do not keep me in your company, because you've had then enough of an excuse. Right? you see here the importance of the commitment made, right? Right? The importance of a commitment made and of holding oneself to that commitment as well. That has an internal aspect. Right? That has an internal aspect that I have made a commitment. I'm going to hold myself to it. Right? Because you have to have self-motivation to fulfill that commitment. But also you see this reality that, the mashayikh tell us, and one of them asked him, Sayyidi, isn't that a bit harsh? He says, look, this is what the Quran entails. Right? I asked him for some advice about people you work with. He said, always give people a second chance, never a third. Because how many instances have we had so far in the story of Sayyidina Musa? 2. Right? That giving people the benefit of the doubt, etc., when it comes to transactions, agreements, etc., there have to be limits. Otherwise, it harms not only that relationship, but has wider harm. Right? Has wider harm. And in many societies, we have a situation where there are no clear limits in relationships. So what happens? You have drama and argument and so on. Now we have to have warmth and mercy, but we also have to have adl, balance. And the whole notion of balance is a rightful balancing of consideration. That's what adl is, right? And you have adl bil adli wal ihsan, fairness, or justice and excellence. But it's not excellence without justice, right? So Sayyidina Musa holds himself to it. He says, you will have full excuse, right? Even though he's apologized previously, right? So that also makes things clear. Now, practically, how do we operationalize this in our lives, in our times? One of the components is that agreements should be made explicit. Agreements should be made explicit. Anything that's important to either party, and that comes up in transactional law, but also applies to other relationships, right? That someone agrees to volunteer. Say, I'll try. Fuzzy commitment. The person who's looking for help says, wonderful, right? So the person saying, I might be able to do an hour or two, maybe, perhaps, maybe not. That's their commitment. It starts like this, it goes like a cone. The other person takes that, oh, he can help. I'll make them responsible for our marketing division. Like that. Then what happens? They go further and further apart. Making our agreements clear and explicit is very important. Even within marriage. Right? Across the world. Right? Because people's circumstances have changed. Even in previously very traditional societies, both the man and the woman are both working outside the house. So many expectations are in flux. So the things are, it's important. One of the secondary lessons, this is what's called isharatun nas. It's a meaning clearly affirmed in the text, but that's not the primary message of the text. لم يسق النص من أجله, right? Is the fact that make all agreements and commitments clear. It applies to marriage. Someone married someone who's doing third year university, says, well, I wanted to have children and start. If it's not going to be clear to both parties, not just now, down the road, agree to it clearly and practically. The Quran tells us to put things in writing. And in our time, it's very, very important. In other situations as well. A child agrees to assist their parents. Okay? The child thinks, well, I'll try to give $500 a month. Or something, maybe, perhaps. That's how agreements happen. Parents say, oh, he's going to start with 500 and inshallah, ideally we need $1,000 a month, maybe 1,500 that way. we can relax. So that's how things happen. So what happens? The khilaf becomes more. They're expecting that, okay, he began with $500 a month. No, put it in writing. That for the next, with dignity. That look, I'm trying to make a commitment, do this with adab, not in a legal contract, with adab. So, al-bayan yuzilu al-khilaf, right? And times have changed. Times have changed. Many of the things that were understood are no longer understood. Not because people are not good, but that's the nature of the world we're in. I go to Turkey, meet many of my teachers, and there's shuyukh who are in their mid-60s, and their wives are working. I was surprised. Some of these shuyukh, like, they're taking you out for lunch. And partly their houses are small, but also because the wife's not home, because she's working, even though she's in her late 50s, because things are different. I was thinking back when I was in Damascus, it was almost inconceivable for one of the ulama to take you to a restaurant, except with really, like, some places in Maidan, they had a back room where the mashayikh would go, but it would be very, but context is different, right? So similarly, when you have these fluctuating considerations, that, well, in our family, everybody pitches in. Yeah, they pitched in when you were together in Baghdad, but here, in Canada, if a 17-year-old is working, are they contributing to the family? No. Why? Because here the assumption is that if a kid, that's their pocket money, and maybe they're expected to save up for university. So there's differing expectations. So make things clear, because otherwise it leads to parting of ways, right? Parting of ways. But even when you part ways, as we'll see, do so with principle. Right? Do so with principle, right? That you may come to situations where you do have to part ways, as we'll see in the closing story that we'll look at today briefly, which is verses 77 and 78.
فانطلقا حتى إذا أتيا أهل قرية استطعما أهلها فأبوا أن يضيفوهما فوجدا فيها جدارا يريد أن ينقض فأقامه قال لو شئت لاتخذت عليه أجرا قال هذا فراق بيني وبينك سأنبئك بتأويل ما لم تستطع عليه صبرا.
So they moved on, right? They headed out until they came to the people of a town. The Quran does not tell us what town it is. In the Jalalain, they tell us it is Antakya. But then it's challenging, because what exactly does Antakya refer to? Right? Which classically known as Antioch. That's a separate question. They sought food from its people, the people of the town. But the people refused to give them hospitality. Then they found a wall ready to collapse, right? And this is a beautiful rhetorical usage in Arabic, because it literally, what does it say? وَجَدْ فَوَجَدَ فِيهَا جِدَارًا يُرِيدُ أَنْ يَنْقَضَّ, right? That wanted to come apart, right? And fall, right? It's almost like it's groaning, like it's, although irada literally is only ascribed, will is ascribed only to living things. A wall is not living, right? So this is a rhetorical use, right? That tells you that, and of course, will precedes power. So it is on the verge of, it's as if it wanted to fall, right? That was, they found the wall ready to collapse, as if wanting to fall, right? So he immediately فَأَقَامَ, right? And the man set it right. Fix the wall. And fixing the wall takes a long time. So they've already been on the boat and then found the child, and Khadir killed the child. Now they go to a city. And Sayyidina Musa, what was he doing before all of this? He just arrived from a long journey. So he's presumably hungry anyways. And what does Al-Khadir do? Right? They refused. Right? And we know a lot of evidence in the Quran that don't expect hospitality from strangers. There are many incidents. Right? Many incidents in the Quran about strangers being ill-treated. Right? Of the many, just something to be thinking about, right? Where else? Just one of them in وَجَاءَ رَجُلٌ مِّنْ أَقْصَى الْمَدِينَةِ يَسْعَى. Right? Who was that man? A man came from the edge of the city, hastening. يَا قَوْمِ اتَّبِعُوا الْمُرْسَلِينَ. He was a stranger. He lived with these people, but they didn't accept him in their midst. So he lived outside. Right? He lived outside. But he still had concern for the people. Right? So we see there are many other incidents. And these kinds of themes, when we read the Quran, we don't read it purely devotionally. Yeah, we read it with pure devotion, but we also reflect. And there's lessons, both on the nature of people, but also our responsibility, that even if others don't welcome you, you are bound not by emotion, but by principle. You are bound. So he refers to them as Ya Qawmi over there. Here, Al-Khadir does that, right? Al-Khadir does that, right? They refuse hospitality, but he set the wall aright. Why? Because that's what his principles entail. We don't respond with emotion, we respond with principle. Okay, if Al-Khadir did that, then here the question is, why is Sayyidina Musa objecting? Because what did Musa alayhi salam respond? He protests. If you wanted, you could have demanded a fee for this. If you wanted, you could have demanded a fee for this. And the incident of Musa and Al-Khadir is mysterious, not only with respect to Al-Khadir's action, but also with some of Sayyidina Musa's actions. That if it was wrong, why did he continue? What's the answer? Because he was sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to seek this man out and learn from him. So it's understood from it that you need to accompany him. It's understood that Sayyidina Musa was aware that he is a prophet, that he receives revelation. We have given آتَيْنَاهُ مِن لَدُنَّا عِلْمًا. We have granted knowledge from us. Right? So that's, but Sayyidina Musa's objection here, isn't it more virtuous to do this? Of course, there's a background. How long does it take to set a wall aside? If a wall falls, is this like a 10-minute job? 15 minutes to put a wall back up? Have you ever? Yeah, it takes a long time. Even if it be a brick wall, because they have to reinforce it, put it back up, it'll take a long time. And the assumption is, Sayyidina Musa arrives hungry. They just had that fish, if you remember. Right? And that too, did it stay with them? Right? آتِنَا غَدَاءَنَا. Right? No, so he finally arrives at his destination. Al-Khadir didn't feed him. They head out. And normally you head out on a little bit of a journey. You go to the boat, then the child, now you go now to a town. Presumably he's hungry. Right? So, and then it would appear that Al-Khadir, and this part of the mystery of Al-Khadir, he didn't have anything with him. He didn't have anything with him. But you have to wonder, always you have to ask these questions. What, why, how, when, these basic questions. one of the reasons the ulama of tafsir mentioned, why would Sayyidina Musa object? Right? What was the objection? Right? لو شئت لاتخذت عليه أجرا. Why is he asking? You could have charged for this. Is he just doing it out of being stingy? Why would he say that if you wished, you could have charged for this? One, the immediate, because you could buy food, because this is from the adab of suhbah, right? That when you accompany someone, who has more rights over you? Your companion or other people? Right? If you're traveling with a friend at the airport and you went to buy a bagel and cheese and there was a 2-for-1 deal, they gave you 2. Your friend will say, you know, nah, I'll eat when we get to Chicago. If you got 2 bagels, who do you give the bagel to? Your friend, or you go to, you know, to some stranger and say, here's a bagel, sir? No. The first person who has rights over you is your companion, as we know. So there are companions here. And there's huquq, as-suhbah. And there's rights of companionship. And the fundamental right of companionship, what is it? It's nush. Right? Is talabul khair fi haqq as-sahib. Right? Is nasiha. Right? Nasiha, sincere concern, is seeking good with respect to another generally. And nasiha towards one's companion is seeking the good of one's companion. That's the basic adab of journey. The adab of journey is not to be nice. And that's one of the bad habits we have as Muslims. Right? We're very good at being nice, but we're not always very good at having sincere concern for what's good for the other person. Right? So, you know, someone's about to travel, say, you know, I'd like to invite you for breakfast. So poor guy, you know, has to go 40 minutes away from where the airport is, and you serve a huge breakfast and you put on a huge show. The guy misses his flight. That was not, so, oh, but I wanted to host him. No, but adab is not doing things that are nice. Adab arises from love, respect, and care for the good of the others. Nasiha. Right? Right? So that context means, okay, you prepare food, but take it to where they are. Right? Instead of driving them to your house and driving them back to where they are, and then they, you know, you're going to drive them, maybe just drive them to the airport. Right? If that's what they needed. So here, Sayyidina Musa's concern, like we see, one of the key lessons in this, right, is Al-Khadir alayhi salam. Why did he fix this wall? Because you respond to the wrong of others, not with what their actions entail. You respond in accordance with what the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala entails. And that is from min ma'ali al-akhlaq. Right? Idfa' billati hiya ahsan. Respond with what is better. And what is better is that which accords to what is right, with consideration of context. Right? So that's Al-Khadir's response. He fixed the wall. But Sayyidina Musa's actions there, which in some ways a little more mysterious, is that Sayyidina Musa is responding according to what is entailed by nasiha, nush, talabul khair fi haqq al-ghayr. Al-Khadir, it appears, did not have much. And one of the signs that he did not have much is the fact that he had not yet had fed himself, because this is their third journey. So Al-Khadir hadn't eaten. He hadn't fed Sayyidina Musa. In all traditional cultures, if you accept to keep someone's company, what's the first thing you do? You feed them. Everybody feeds everybody. Right? That's just basic aspect of human dignity. But he wasn't carrying any food. Right? They say, presumably, and there's things in the biblical tradition, he looked very noble, but mysterious, but didn't look well off, right? Didn't seem to have anything. Because a wealthy traveler would have things, right? You would have a riding animal, you'd have a staff, you'd have some cattle, like people who wandered around, they'd have certain things, right? But he didn't have any of that. He's traveling alone. Right? So Sayyidina Musa, so we always have to ask why. Right? Don't jump to answers, because when you jump to answers, the answers are frequently wrong. Right? Say, Sayyidina Musa was upset and hungry. No. That's unbecoming of a prophet even, right? But rather, this is sincere concern for Sayyidina al-Khadir. Right? Right? So that's Sayyidina Musa's consideration is above all of nusх, right? And this is and nasiha and adab, caring for another is not in the decorative elements, right? Is what does the person need, right? Right? And that Antioch, if it was Antioch, this Qarya was quite wealthy, so they would be able to pay. Right? They would have been able to pay. Right? But then he tells them, this is the parting of our ways. Right? And I will explain to you what you could not bear patiently. And we'll look at that, the parting of the ways, and the Al-Khadir's explanations. But you see, they part with principle. They part with principle. It's a rare adab. Right? It often happens. Someone came, they set up a private class with somebody, they start memorizing Quran, and the person just disappears. Years later, they run into each other. Oh, I apologize, I traveled. Okay. The teachers, etc., they don't object, but there's an adab of parting. Whether it's due to life circumstances or if difference arose. But still, even if difference arose, they say, Inna Allah la yas'al an suhbati sa'a. Allah asks about the company even of a minute. Let's say the person made a mistake. Does that wipe out everything else? No. We should not be people of emotion. Right? As one of the scholars said, our emotions have destroyed us as an ummah in so many different aspects. We should be people of principle. You tickle some people and khalas, they go mad. And if you sit back and think about it as a system, all you have to do, just annoy a person a little bit, طار عقله. Right? So if you're smart, what would you do? If you want to take advantage of this person, just get them a little bit upset. We should not be. There is no value to emotion on its own. That's hawa. Emotion is hawa. Right? Unless the emotion is guided by revelation and reason, then it's khayru qa'id. Because you have energy, you have resolve, you have commitment, you have care. So here, they're parting. Sayyidina Musa, ostensibly, this is the third time, despite making commitments before and at each stage, he has continued to ask, because he had to ask. But even then, Al-Khadir responds not with emotion. What's wrong with you? No. This is the parting of our ways. Principle. Right? And it's dignity. But I will explain to you what you could not bear patiently. So you understand, because he maintains nasiha with the person even after. Because the company was not for the sake of the person, was for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And that is an important lesson. Right? In any relationship. عاشروهن بالمعروف أو فارقوهن بالمعروف. Live together in the known good. The ma'ruf is the known good. Right? The established good. Right? and part with the established good. And that's what taqwa entails. Right? What taqwa entails, as Surah Al-Talaq makes clear. So we're going to see in the next week, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, the unpacking of this and the explanation of the incidents, which will give us some of the background of the incidents and the wisdoms behind what Sayyidina Al-Khadir did. Last thing, of course, we have to reiterate so people are not confused. There are people who take wrongful understandings that, oh, well, there's a shara' zahir and there's a shara' batin. That's batil. There's an outward sacred law and an inward sacred law. Saying the two are separate is batil. Yes, ash-shar'u lahu zahirun wa batin. The sharia has an outward and an inward, but the outward and inward are inseparable. It's like the person's heart and lungs. They're within you. But can you say, okay, I'm here, but my heart is on the couch and my lungs are in the kitchen? Ma'qul? You're dead if that's the case, right? Similarly, any understanding of religion that separates between the outward and the inward is like a body in which you take its heart out. It can't survive for very long. Maybe on the operating table it does, but they have to still keep the heart pumping, etc. That's surgery time. But in the normal case, you can't do that. Right? So the shara, so those kinds of and we have to be very careful, because now there are all kinds of different people. And very often you have to be careful on social media feeds, etc. Random people show up of all kinds of things. Sometimes they look the part. They've got the beard, or the lady has a hijab. They look very spiritual. The only reason they look very spiritual, all of COVID, they're sitting at home, not talking to anybody. You know, maybe they did a lot of ibadah, but suddenly they're streaming online. Or they just bought an expensive light. And you shine enough light on somebody, they look like they're munawwar, right? That's not hujjah for anything. That's our whim to say, oh, let me listen. That's hawa. And they come up with these kinds of things. There is no separation. Sayyidina Khadir was acting according to the divine command through revelation. Sayyidina Musa was acting according to revelation. But after the Prophet ﷺ, there is no shara that comes. There is no wahi that comes. Right? And no claim of direct revelation from God. Yes, the righteous get inspiration. The common believer gets inspirations. All kinds of amazing things happen. But that's not shara. I met someone in Trinidad. I stayed at the house of someone in Trinidad who was from a Hindu family. He had no interest in religion. He saw the Prophet ﷺ in his dream. The Prophet ﷺ told him about Islam. I said, how would I learn about it? He said, so-and-so is coming. There's one of the Syrian shuyukh who lives in the United States. He says, so-and-so is coming. He's a grandson of mine. Go to him and learn. He says, where do I go to him? He said, he's coming to Trinidad. He learned the dates, everything on that. He said, this man wasn't on the internet. He knew Muslims, but nobody he knew went to that event. Yes. But can you take, so that's inayah of Allah, but no right and wrong can be established just on thoughts and inspirations. So that's very, very important to be clear about. Anybody who separates between zahir al-shara, the outward sacred law, and inward inspirations, meanings, realities, that is deviance. It was unacceptable in the past, it's unexpected now, and it'll always be unaccepted. But there's great wisdom in what Al-Khadir did. We saw a number of lessons about clarity in all relationships. One of the most critical relationships in life that one can have is the relationship with a teacher, whether a teacher of learning or a teacher of mentorship or a teacher of spiritual guidance. But that is a principled relationship. There should be clarity in it in the beginning and during it, and the terms and context of both parties should be clear. But they should be bayan. And those same principles apply to other relationships as well, so that we don't have misunderstandings. And we would contend, and the mashayikh would concur, that there needs to be more definition in a lot of our commitments. Right? because it leads to misunderstanding. Someone's got a small house here in Misaga. A friend is moving to Canada, say, come stay with us. 7 months later, would you have an issue with someone living, with their kids in your apartment? Would be challenging? Yeah. But then you're embarrassed. Like, what do we do? No. From the beginning, just be very clear. Right? Be very clear. Do it with dignity and grace. Right? Because wallah, back home it was different. Were your houses this small? Right? Houses were built with comfortable separation. Right? 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 But houses here aren't built with that. Right? Even hotel rooms aren't built like that, right? They're built with openness to the extent of madness. I was staying with actually, even within family, we got a hotel room in Frankfurt, and there's a window from the bedroom. It's a two-bed hotel room, and there's a window into the toilet, into the washroom. Why do you need a window into the washroom? So I had to hang a towel because I don't want to see my kids showering. Hey, right? So just make things clear. That's one of the very important aspects here as well. But also we see that we have to appreciate what happens in the Quranic stories. We need both reflection, because so much is unstated in the story, number one. Number two, we need to keep connected with the works of tafsir, right? So we understand the background to the stories, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Much more could be said about these verses, but this is just a touch of the meanings of these verses. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Inshallah, we'll be starting the Mukhtasar Sahih al-Bukhari just in